The Wilson family lived in the south part of Memphis, Tennessee. The house was a one-story building with a small yard, a well-kept facade, and old wrought iron gates. 3 people lived there: 68-year-old Walter Wilson, his daughter Linda, and her son, 18-year-old Marcus. According to neighbors and acquaintances, the family was considered ordinary. Linda worked as a nurse at a city clinic, Walter was retired after working as a school bus driver, and Marcus was a high school student and worked part-time at an auto repair shop. Neighbors described Walter as a quiet, polite, but reserved person. He rarely participated in public gatherings and preferred to spend time at home. The relationship between him and his grandson seemed close. They watched sports matches together, went to the store, worked in the yard. However, police records indicate that already a year before the tragedy, several people from the family circle noted that the grandfather was excessively involved in Marcus's personal life. The first warning signs appeared in the spring of 2011. A classmate of Marcus's said that one evening, when they were studying for final exams, Walter came into his grandson's room without knocking, lingered there, and had a conversation with him in a raised voice, after which Marcus came out to his friend pale and refused to discuss what had happened. No official complaints or appeals followed. During the same period, Linda began to notice that Walter increasingly insisted that Marcus spend weekends only with him. He would cancel his grandson's meetings with friends without his consent, citing the need to help with the housework. Witness testimony later confirmed that the grandfather and grandson did indeed often go out of town together, sometimes for several days, and Marcus did not share with his mother where exactly they were going. In July 2011, an anonymous tip was received by the Memphis Police Department from an unknown man. He claimed to have seen an older man and a younger man who looked like Walter and Marcus at a motel on I-40 and were acting not like family. The investigation was limited to a phone call to Linda to check if everything was okay with the family. The woman confirmed that everything was okay and no further action was taken. According to the case file, around this time, Marcus began to show signs of withdrawal. He began to socialize less with his classmates, stopped inviting friends over, and stayed in his room more often. Teachers noted that he skipped classes without a good reason. By the end of 2011, the situation within the family had changed even more. Walter began to accompany his grandson almost everywhere, including training and school events. According to one of the coaches, the grandfather always remained nearby, sometimes waiting for Marcus in the locker room, which caused confusion among others. In January 2012, Linda asked her son directly for the first time if he had any problems with his grandfather. Marcus responded evasively, saying that it's complicated and that he didn't want to talk about it so as not to make it worse. This conversation was later recorded in the mother's interrogation report as the first moment when she suspected that something was going on in the family that went beyond the usual relationship. A few weeks later, an incident occurred that became one of the key ones in the investigation. Marcus came to school with a bruise on his neck, explaining to the teacher that it was accidentally hit with a belt. The teacher reported this to the school social worker, but the report recorded that confirmation of violence was not established. At the time, this did not attract the attention of law enforcement. Gradually, Marcus's behavior became more and more withdrawn. His phone, which was later confiscated, contained deleted messages recovered by forensic analysis in which he wrote to a friend, "I'm trapped, he won't leave me alone." By the spring of 2012, the family had established a routine in which Walter supervised most of his grandson's time. Linda, who worked shifts, often returned home late at night and was not always able to monitor the situation. Her grandfather used her absence to spend long hours alone with Marcus. Official materials indicate that it was during this period that the phase that the investigation later called the closed cycle began, when both parties to the conflict were in constant contact without the intervention of third parties. This closed regime became the basis for the events that took place in the summer of 2012. Since April 2012, according to witness statements and data collected during the investigation, Walter Wilson's behavior towards his grandson became more obsessive and controlling. Investigators recorded that the grandfather began to interfere with Marcus's personal plans, even when it concerned his studies or work. The first recorded incident occurred on April 9th. According to phone records, Marcus had arranged to meet his classmates at a shopping mall. Half an hour before leaving, Walter demanded that he go with him on business. Marcus refused, which led to a verbal conflict that resulted in the meeting with his friends being disrupted. Subsequently, as social media correspondence showed, Marcus began to avoid any plans that could anger his grandfather. In late April, the family's neighbor, Sarah Lawson, saw Marcus and Walter leaving the house together late at night, carrying a duffel bag. They left in Walter's old pickup truck and did not return until around lunchtime the next day. According to the neighbor, Marcus seemed tired, did not speak, and immediately went to his room. It was not possible to determine where they were, but the case file shows a motel room charge in Walter's name in a neighboring county for those dates. Since the end of spring 2012, the grandfather began to show up more and more often at his grandson's work in the auto repair shop. Marcus's colleagues reported that Walter sometimes waited for him right in the room, sitting at the entrance, and did not leave even for lunch. Several times he interrupted his grandson's work, saying that they urgently needed to go somewhere. The head of the workshop made verbal comments, but did not dare to interfere more deeply. In early May, an event occurred that the investigation later classified as an episode of psychological pressure. Marcus did not come home for the night, and Linda, worried, began calling her friends. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, he returned with Walter. According to his mother, her son looked scared, but not physically injured. When asked where they had been, Walter replied that he had been helping a guy with important matters. Marcus refused to elaborate. A week later, Marcus missed 2 days of school in a row. He called his class teacher and said he was sick, but a few days later, a classmate saw him and Walter in a suburban park, sitting in a car parked away from people. By late May 2012, according to an analysis of his internet history, Marcus began searching for information on how to leave the state without papers and how to report domestic abuse to the police. These searches were deleted, but were restored by experts. In early June, Marcus's school held a graduation ceremony. According to classmates, Walter insisted on coming along, even though his parents usually attended such events. During the celebration, he took his grandson outside several times, and upon his return, Marcus was noticeably depressed. One of those present later mentioned seeing his grandfather hold his hand longer than usual, which seemed not like the usual concern of a relative. The investigation paid special attention to an episode that occurred on June 18th. Linda was returning from work and saw Walter and Marcus looking at old family photos in the living room. In one of the photos, Marcus was still a child, and his grandfather lingered his gaze on him, uttering a phrase that Linda found strange: "You have always been my closest person." After her appearance, the conversation quickly ended. Soon after, in late June, Marcus made his first attempt to openly limit contact with his grandfather. He told his mother that he wanted to temporarily stay with a friend, citing a desire to be apart. Walter was adamant that it would break up the family. That evening, there was a confrontation in the house, resulting in Marcus staying. But after that, according to his mother, he began to avoid contact, even with her. According to the investigation, during this period, the grandfather and grandson often disappeared from home without explanation. Travel routes could not be established due to the lack of GPS tracking in Walter's old car. However, surveillance cameras in one of the suburban motels recorded their stay there together in mid-July, 2 days before Marcus's death. Taken individually, these episodes might have seemed random or like family misunderstandings, but taken together, they painted a picture for investigators of systematic control and isolation that had reached its limits by the summer of 2012. By mid-July 2012, the situation in the Wilson family had become extremely tense. According to the investigation materials, it was during this period that events occurred that experts later called the point of no return. The first episode was recorded on July 12th. That day, Marcus came home from the auto repair shop earlier than usual. His mother, Linda, was on night duty, and only Walter was home. According to neighbors, loud voices and screams were heard in the house at about 7 p.m. Neighbor Sarah Lawson, who lived through the wall, claimed that she heard a young voice say, "Leave me alone. I'm not yours." Over the next few minutes, the noise suddenly stopped. Later, during an examination of the scene, investigators recorded a broken mug and stains from spilled tea on the living room floor. The next day, July 13th, Marcus did not show up for work and did not answer calls from friends. One of them, James, told police he had sent him a text message asking him to get out of town, to which he received a short reply: "I can't. He's keeping me here." Forensic experts recovered the message from the phone's deleted data. According to his mother, that same evening, Marcus seemed particularly depressed and told her that he couldn't live like this anymore. Linda tried to find out more details, but the conversation was interrupted by Walter, who intervened and said that his son needed peace. After that, Marcus went to his room and did not come out until late at night. Things got worse the next day. Cell phone billing records show Walter and Marcus together outside of town at a motel on I-40. Surveillance video captured their arrival on the evening of July 13th. The footage shows the grandfather and grandson checking in under a false name, with Marcus looking tense, not speaking, and not looking away. According to the motel manager, Walter insisted on being the only one with a key to his room. It was there, according to investigators, that the most disturbing episode before the tragedy occurred. Fingernail marks and fabric fibers matching Marcus's t-shirt were later found on the walls of the room. Although the experts did not find direct evidence of violence, the nature of the evidence suggested that the grandson tried to resist. The next day, July 14th, they returned home to Memphis. Neighbors noted that Marcus looked blank and was largely unresponsive to questions. One witness said he had the look of a man who had given up. The last major conflict occurred that evening. According to the report, Linda returned home at around 9:30 p.m. to find her son and father arguing. Marcus was in tears, saying that he would go to a friend's and never return. Walter, on the contrary, was calm and kept saying, "You're not going anywhere. You belong to the family." The woman tried to intervene, but the situation escalated so much that she decided to go into the bedroom to avoid making the conflict worse. At 10:15 p.m., according to neighbors, loud screams were heard again, this time the noise of furniture falling and a sharp blow. Neighbor Sarah Lawson called the police, but the signal came too late. When the squad arrived, the tragedy had already happened. At the scene, detectives found Marcus dead. The body was in the living room, neatly laid on the sofa. A rope belt was tied around his neck, and a mug of tea was standing nearby. Walter was in the kitchen at the time, calmly leafing through an old family album. When he was detained, he offered no resistance and uttered only one phrase, "I did what I had to do." That night was a turning point. Investigators officially reclassified the case from a suspicious death to premeditated murder. When Memphis police officers responded to the Wilson family home at 10:47 p.m. on July 14, 2012, the scene they saw immediately raised doubts in the officer on duty. The body of 18-year-old Marcus Wilson was lying on the couch, his arms folded neatly across his chest. A robe strap was tied around his neck, the noose pulled tight, but not quite tight, which seemed odd for a suicide. The report recorded that the situation in the house did not show signs of a struggle. There was a mug of unfinished tea in the living room, and a book with a bookmark in the middle lay nearby. The police noted the lack of disorder, although the neighbors insisted that they heard screams and the sound of a blow. This discrepancy was immediately noted in the report. Walter Wilson, 68, was in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table looking at photographs from an old album. According to officers, he seemed completely calm, did not try to escape, and even offered to sit down and discuss things calmly. When asked what happened, Walter replied, "He felt sick, and I helped him leave." Marcus was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner noted, "Strangulation marks, no bruises on the arms, skin is clear, but shallow scratches were found on the inner surface of the forearms, consistent with restraint." There were not only belt marks on the victim's neck, but also finger marks, indicating manual compression before the noose was tightened. A search of the house turned up some disturbing finds. In a closet in Walter's bedroom, police found a box containing dozens of photographs of Marcus over the years, from childhood to recent secretly taken photos. Some of the photos had been taken in the bathroom and bedroom without the young man's knowledge. There was also a notebook in which Walter had written, "He can't leave me, he's a part of me." Experts examined the contents of the suspect's laptop. The hard drive contained folders with materials related to non-traditional relationships between men, including images that the investigation found incriminating. What alarmed the investigators most was that some of the files were signed with the grandson's name. Questioning neighbors revealed Walter had been acting increasingly strange in recent months. Neighbor Sarah Lawson said, "I saw him standing outside Marcus's window at night, looking in. It was early July. I thought he was checking to see if he was asleep, but it was disturbing." Testimony from Marcus's friends also proved key. One of them, James, showed police correspondence in which Marcus wrote directly, "He makes me do things I don't want to do. I'm afraid to leave. He says it will end badly then." This correspondence was recovered from the phone through examination and added to the case. During the investigation, it was discovered that 2 days before the murder, Walter had rented a motel room in a neighboring county, registering under an assumed name. The motel manager described Marcus as depressed and scared. Biological traces of both were later found in the room, and fingernail marks were found on the wall, as if someone had tried to escape or resist. After Walter's arrest, he was sent for a psychiatric examination. The doctor recorded that the accused was fully aware of his actions, but demonstrated obsessive ideas about his grandson. The conclusion stated, "There is a pathological fixation on the object, turning into a form of addiction." During interrogations, Walter hardly denied his involvement. His answers were fragmentary. He didn't want to, but he had to. I didn't allow him to belong to someone else. It was inevitable. The investigation classified his confessions as partial. By the end of July 2012, prosecutors formally charged Walter Wilson with first-degree murder. The trial of Tennessee versus Walter Wilson began in October 2012 in the Memphis Circuit Court. The trial immediately caused a public outcry. The case of how a grandfather killed his own grandson was covered not only by local media, but also by federal publications. On the very first day, the prosecutor presented the materials collected by the investigation, photographs of the crime scene, records of Marcus's correspondence with friends, as well as albums and diaries of Walter confiscated from the house. The jury was shown pages where the defendant wrote in his own hand, "Marcus must be with me always, and if he leaves, I will not be able to live." Particular emphasis was placed on the medical report. The medical examiner confirmed that death was caused by manual strangulation, followed by belt tightening. The report indicated that there were characteristic fingerprints on the victim's neck, and the position of the body on the couch looked like a deliberate staging. The prosecution called Marcus's neighbors and friends as witnesses. Sarah Lawson, who lived nearby, told the jury, "I heard him screaming 2 days before he died. He was screaming, 'Leave me, you have no right.' Then there was silence." Marcus's friend James confirmed the contents of the correspondence. "He was texting me that he was scared. He wanted to leave, but he said his grandfather was threatening him." Linda, the victim's mother, testified under oath. She said, "I saw how my father completely dominated my son's life. He didn't let him breathe. Marcus didn't directly say what was happening, but his eyes said it all." Her words were accompanied by a demonstration of Marcus's reconstructed search queries: how to run away from home, what to do if a relative threatens. Walter's defense was based on an attempt to portray the defendant as an elderly man with mental disabilities. The lawyer claimed that his client suffered from obsessive thoughts and did not understand the severity of his actions. In support of the defense, a psychiatrist was presented who noted that Walter had fixed fantasies and pathological attachments, but also acknowledged that the defendant understood the consequences of his actions. The most controversial moment was the interrogation of the defendant himself. When asked by the prosecutor whether he had killed his grandson, Walter replied, "I did it because I didn't want him to leave me. It was the right thing to do." The jury heard his words in the complete silence of the courtroom, after which the judge ordered the hearing to be adjourned. As additional evidence, surveillance footage from a motel where Walter and Marcus spent the night 2 days before the tragedy was presented. The footage shows Marcus walking slowly, with his head down, and Walter literally pushing him toward the door of the room. These materials had a strong impression on the jury. The verdict was handed down on November 3, 2012. The court found Walter Wilson guilty of first-degree murder. The jury unanimously rejected the mental disorder defense, finding that the defendant acted consciously and systematically. The judge handed down the sentence, life imprisonment without parole. In his closing remarks, he said, "This is one of the most perverse and difficult cases our court has ever seen. The crime was committed by a man who had a duty to protect and look after his family." After the verdict was announced, Linda left the courtroom accompanied by her relatives. Journalists recorded that she did not give a single comment. The public perceived the verdict as fair, although the discussion of this case remained a topic for discussion for a long time about how such situations can remain hidden within the family for so long.